All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Voices of Verse Therapy. I'm Adam, CEO and one of the founders of Verse. And today I'm super excited to introduce Liz Zyzo. She's an experienced SLP and the founder of Toddler Talk. She specializes in areas like dual language learning, early language development, and she brings a family centered, play based approach to her work with children and families. Also, she's one of the Verse OGs. She was here when we weren't even called Verse. So someone that we've had a really long relationship with at this point, which is awesome. And Liz, it's great to have you here. So thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Adam, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you. So, Liz, let's start with your journey. I'd love to learn, or maybe you could just share with the audience what first drew you to speech language pathology and how has your career evolved over the last 9 years of doing this?
Fun fact, I actually saw a speech therapist when I was, I think in first grade. An articulation impairment, couldn't say my R's, um, to the point where I was having my older brother talk for me. I would like whisper, I'm like, can you order this for me? I would refuse to answer the phone. Like that was how I was about speaking, because of my R's. Saw a speech therapist and she basically changed my life. I all of a sudden like completely came out of my shell, was talking, making friends. Um, as you know, like in elementary school, that's huge, to form relationships with children in your grade, teachers, whatnot, and advocate for yourself. I loved speech therapy from the beginning. It wasn't until I took an intro to communication disorders class at UConn. Um, just fell in love with the fact that I could work with so many individuals of all different ages and work on vastly different areas. It could be anywhere from aphasia to, early childhood development. I loved that I was able to help people across the lifespan, which actually led to me working in, you know, just about every setting under the sun except for hospitals. It's been great.
Yeah. So, as you got in these different settings, especially, you've been at this for a little while now, which means that you've been practicing throughout the entire shift to more virtual therapy through the pandemic. How have the different experiences and settings that you've been in shaped your approach to therapy, especially with your focus on some of the younger population, where some folks might feel like, hey, they may respond a little bit better to in person. I would just kind of love to learn, how your approach has kind of changed over the years with the different settings that you've worked in.
Yeah. I mean, I would honestly say that every setting that I've been in has taught me really valuable. And it's really taught me to individualize of the speech therapy interventions, my approach to assessments, everything from how I interact with a family has been really shaped by all of the different experiences I've had in different settings. When I was working in a skilled nursing facility, making sure that those goals and the way that I was communicating with the family and the patient functional and that it prioritized their quality of life. And then going on to schools and, working with the birth to three population. I mean, I learned about that collaboration with families, but teachers as well, school psychologists, occupational therapists. And so I think being in all of these different settings, understanding what a family might need in that given circumstance in their life, I think is really important. Some families do, they prioritize in person, and I can see the benefits of that. Some parents prioritize, telehealth, and I also can see the benefits of that. So it's really just tailoring the family needs where they are in, that moment in time and being able to provide them with the therapy that's going to work for them, right? Because if it's not sustainable, then progress is probably not going to be sustainable as well.
Yeah, and regardless of setting, I mean, one of the things that's been awesome to see with you is obviously we can't sit in on your sessions, but we do get feedback from your clients, and it always seems like you do an amazing job at getting kiddos to be able to engage, especially ones that may have been reluctant to engage in like different therapies that they've tried or like different places that they've gone. Like you clearly have something that's working. So could you tell us a little bit more about that family-centered approach and that play-based approach to your work? Like, could you explain what that actually looks like in practice and how it's been so effective for you?
Yeah. And honestly, I have to give credit to the fact that I have worked in whether it was in the schools, early intervention in the homes versus in the clinic. And so I think that experience, teletherapy, has been really beneficial. As mentioned, like there are going to be kiddos that respond really well to online games, but then there are some kiddos where parents are like, think I can get them to pay attention to the screen. And I'm like, that is okay as well. There are so many ways that we can incorporate the speech therapy strategies, the language opportunities into a session without actually, having them stare at a screen. Sometimes I don't expect that for, a 2-year-old. Sometimes I don't expect that for a 2-year-old. Family-centered, play-based approach really is meeting the family where they are in, understanding how they view screen time, for example, how they view, speech therapy in general, or, different medical diagnoses, for example. I really do think that play and social interactions from play are just the foundation for language and learning. That's why I always like to incorporate a play-based approach with whatever the child is interested in. I don't know about you, but trying to pay attention to something that I am just not quite interested in is much harder than something that, okay, I'm just drawn to this. I like this. That's interesting for me. I'd say that play-based approach, following the child's lead, teaches you a lot about that child, but also just keeping that open communication with families so that you can learn more about them. That's the importance of family-centered play-based approaches, is that you're considering what is important to the family, to the child, and those are the things that they're going to want to incorporate in their everyday life and make it as meaningful as possible. And the best way to do that, I think, is through that family-centered play-based approach.
Yeah, I think when I started as an outsider to, I never went through like pediatric therapy through telehealth. Like the age just didn't really work out. So when I learned more about how people were actually making that work, I was surprised to hear that a lot of it ended up being like parental coaches and getting the parents involved so that they could almost do pieces of the session on behalf of you, or they could have like a way to take home what you taught them so that the kiddos could have like regular practice throughout their life, because it's not like you're going to be on a Zoom call with the kid 24/7, right? So you kind of have to give the parents the tools to be able to train their kiddo throughout the day and to be able to use what they've learned with you in like real world situations. So I'd just love to learn a little bit more about how you involve parents in the therapy process and what role do they play in supporting their child's progress outside of therapy.
And from day one, I like to really, really educate and remind parents that they are the experts in their child. It's not me. They know their child best. They probably are spending, I mean, unless they're going to daycare full time or preschool full time, they are the ones, even then, they're spending the majority of the time with that child. So they know them best, and they would be the best ones to implement the strategies. So oftentimes, what I like to do throughout my sessions, it's subconscious at this point, is what I call guided practice. It's this concept of I do, you do, or I do, we do, you do method, where I'll demonstrate some of the strategies that I'm working on. And it's funny, I think at any given time when I'm on a computer screen, toys ready, but like I might show 2 different toys. And it's so funny. I have an entire bag of toys right here. But like I might show toys. I'm like, at this point, cleaning up is just not a thing. Like I might show them 2 toys and I'll demonstrate for them. Child's not paying attention to the screen, that's okay. I'll demonstrate and I'll say, oh, do you want a dog or do you want a goat? And then I can say, Mom, can you go and do that? And then she holds up 2 items and then she does it. And it's like we're doing it together. Do you want a dog or do you want a goat? And so she learns those strategies of providing choices, for example. that having me there where I'm kind of coaching her, I'm, sharing her, this is what I'm doing and this is why. I think I like to explain why and what the outcomes are going to be by using certain strategies like choices. Always give that to parents throughout the session, education, just different strategies and why they're important. And then I encourage them to try that. And it doesn't have to be all of a sudden they're doing this 24 hours a day, but it's okay, maybe at lunch now, every lunch, they're incorporating choices. Do you want milk or do you want water? It's one way of not overwhelming parents because I think oftentimes if we give them so many strategies, it's just like, keep up with this. Instead, just a few strategies and just a few times of day to incorporate it, I think is really helpful. Throughout my sessions, I think I'm always trying to educate the parents on what I'm doing, really drive, my sessions based on specific strategies that I know are evidence-based that are going to help that kiddo in whatever areas they're struggling with. Incorporating these 3D objects for parents, showing them by demonstrating for them, but then also encouraging them and giving them confidence to practice on their own. It's the best thing in the world to see a parent just all of a sudden, do you want this or this? Before session even gets started, I'm like, I'm so proud of you. This is amazing. It's like you're the speech therapist now. That really, probably like the highlight of what I do is having parents also have the confidence, not only the child, but the parents now have the confidence of like, oh, I've got this. I can help my child as well.
Yeah, and it's not like you said, it's not a one size fits all approach. And we've seen with your practice that you're open to seeing kiddos that have like a diverse set of needs. So how do you change these strategies for folks that have, developmental delays or even dual language learners?
That's a great question. And again, I think what it comes down to is understanding what a child's strengths are and then building off of those strengths. So I like to bridge those gaps by identifying, okay, well, your child is doing such a remarkable job with like their gross motor development is, through the roof. Let's incorporate gross motor into some language activities because, they're not requesting, but they love climbing. Then we'll incorporate the climbing into, a requesting activity where all of a sudden they're asking for more climbing or like ladder. And they're using their words to communicate something that they're really motivated by and that is a strength for them. So I like to use that strengths based approach. But then I also like to incorporate visual supports depending on, their ability level. Because I think at this point in time, especially with young kiddos, that they respond really well to modalities. So whether it's verbal, visual, incorporating songs, different books, and not expecting them to, sit through the book with me and read every single word on the page, but instead be creative with the book. I like reenacting, the scenes in a book sometimes more than reading the words on a book where they see, oh, girl, she's, through the farm and she's saying hi to all the animals, then we kind of set up all of our animals and then they act it through so that they can kind of feel like they're a part of the book, for example. I like to again just go off of what they are responding best to, and sometimes I have to pivot. Sometimes I have to pivot after 2 minutes, and that's okay. I think trial and error, especially at the young kiddo age, is really important to be flexible and to just be open to, okay, this isn't going the way that I planned, but you know what? It's even better. We're trying something different and is doing a great job with this task or activity. For dual language learners, a lot of times parents who ask me questions about like, I don't know how to go about doing this. Like how, like, should I talk to them in only English? And I think understanding what the goals are. Like if you want your child to be bilingual, then I would say whatever the language you are most comfortable speaking, speak to your child in that language. That is great. And, it actually, there's research that supports that having a really strong foundation in one language is going to support an overall language development in multiple languages. She is actually from the Philippines, so she spoke growing up, and she me to speak English. She really, anytime that talking to me, she tried her best to talk to me in English, but I overheard her talking in Tagalog to all of my aunts and uncles. I understood Tagalog and I still understand Tagalog, but because I was never encouraged to use it verbally, I can't speak it, but I can understand it because she exposed me to the Tagalog. So I think sometimes, having parents hear that like encouragement in both languages is really crucial at this young age as well. And it's just understanding the family's goals. If they want them to be bilingual, if they only want them to speak one language, then work, to really support those goals.
Yeah, it seems like the type of plan that you create is really heavily influenced by a few things that are super unique depending on the family that you're working with. How do you go about even figuring out what the kid is actually into? So you had the climbing example before. Like, is that something where you send them a survey? You do it in their evaluation? Does it come up naturally in your first few sessions? And then similarly, for the family's goals, like, do you have separate meetings with the family? How does that all come to be? Like, how do you learn about them?
So I like to do a pretty in-depth consultation call. I like to gather as much information about the primary concerns of the parent, the caregiver, whoever is, putting in that referral. Because at the end of the day, it's not just provide therapy for your child, but I want it to be a good fit for the family as well. And I will admit that, my coaches may not be perfect or the, way that other families might, their speech therapy. So I really want what's best for the family and what's best for the child. So I like to gather as much information during the consultation call. So I'll gather, the concerns, their, family dynamic kind of looks like, because then I can, determine, okay, they might be a good candidate for teletherapy or they might be a better fit for in person. And if I can't provide that in person, but I think of a person who might be really great, that's the beauty of Verse therapy, is that I'm like, ooh, okay, let me talk to this therapist on Verse. They're available because I think they would be a great fit. That's kind of how I start off with the consultation, but then I gather that information during, or additional information during the evaluation. So not only am I gathering information from the parents or, whoever is attending the session with their child, like I said, they know the child the best. So I'll ask information about like, okay, like what do they like doing throughout the day? And I try to keep it as open-ended as possible so that, I'm not swaying like, oh, do they like Paw Patrol? Maybe. Instead, I just like to keep it open-ended so that they know that they can just share like what's going on in their day, like what does I like to do throughout the day. One kiddo who, for some reason, just didn't really like toys, and that's okay. You know what he loved? He loved playing with the salt shaker and the pepper shakers on the table. And so we were able to incorporate cooking and those types of daily routines based on, cooking and supplies, all of that stuff. And he loved it. That's kind of how I like to gather the information, is through parent input, but then also a behavioral observation. So this is when I am just observing the child, like I'm following their lead. I'm not really, I'm presenting options to the child, but it's more open-ended where they can go in any direction they want. And then I see what they gravitate towards, and sometimes it's cars, sometimes it's blocks, sometimes it's books. It can be anything. Think those three things, the consultation, the parent interview, the behavioral observations, are, really great ways of gathering that information on what a child is really interested in. But what I like to think of is that every time that I'm working with a child, whether it's in therapy or during an evaluation, I'm gathering that information because it's change as well, right? Like a kiddo might be interested in cars, for time, and then all of a sudden they're really into a play kitchen set. So I like to always kind of see what they're interested in and go off of that. So following the child's lead is kind of what I say. That's a really helpful tool for parents as well to engage in activities that the child is most interested in.
Yeah, and on the other side, so you talked about how if somebody isn't the perfect fit for you, there's these opportunities to refer them out so that they can get like the right SLP for them. Part of the reason that we made Verse was we looked at SLP burnout being a huge issue that was pretty underreported on. So we admittedly thought that there was like a big opportunity to make something that burned people out less so that we could get SLPs to that were really great to work with us. And that like matching contributes, or at least what we've seen, contributes so much to like why SLPs can be frustrated. So there were other websites where people could hop on and be able to schedule a consult and get going with an SLP. But what we were trying to do was a bunch of SLPs that did a lower amount of hours as opposed to a smaller set of SLPs who were doing it as their main gig and seeing a million different types of clients. Because at least what we saw was when you had a client that was basically forced to see you and you were forced to see them and it wasn't that right fit, that created a lot of tension and was one of the main reasons why SLPs were like, hey, I have this caseload of like 50 folks. I'm just constantly context switching. I'm not like really building up my skills in that exact specialty that I want. So we were like, hey, there might be a chance where if we just get so many different SLPs who are into different things and we on the tech side kind of make the matching really straightforward, it could be a way where you could get people the right SLP and lower burnout on the SLP side. So yeah, that's kind of how we looked at it. I'm glad that you're able to see a little bit of that, especially as you kind of seen this evolve, because even with you is like, we start out and basically everybody that's in your states, you're like the first SLP that's available. And then over time, we've kind of gotten like a little squad, so we can actually start doing this referring out. And I'm hoping that I can be like more and more of that so that people are only ever matched with like the perfect SLP for them, whether that's based off like specialty, schedule, insurance, stuff like that.
Yeah. And that's honestly the biggest change and the best benefit to private practice and working with Verse is that it just has opened the doors to working with clients that you can help, but then also being able to refer out to other therapists who may be a really good fit for that child or that adult. And so I love that. And it's not funny, but it's funny that like a lot of times when you're a generalist as an SLP, like you have to know obviously what you're treating and what you're working with, but there's a lot of times where I was a generalist and I had a caseload of 50, 60, and I didn't feel confident. And that's not a really great feeling going into work, being like either I'm going to have to do a bunch of research to become confident in it, or to just not feel like that is your strong suit. And we're all human, so there's certain areas that you do feel really confident in. And I love that with private practice, with Verse Therapy, you can truly max out on the clients that that you are the best fit for, that you can really make a difference in, have the resources to connect them with another speech therapist. I love that. And I also notice like just being with these kiddos that I'm like, oh, I have so many things to share. Times my sessions, I don't mind going 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes over. Don't quote me on that, but it's nice to be able to do that just because you care and you have the time and you have the flexibility to do that, versus in a school setting, for example, sometimes your hands are tied with just time constraints that with private practice you don't have those time constraints anymore, which is nice.
Yeah, totally. And this is something that we have noticed. Like, so the founders Verse have like semi-significant healthcare background. We started as like a more generalist healthcare company, and something that you just notice like all over healthcare is that everybody kind of suffers because the clinicians are the ones that are forced to just see all of these different people in the private practice model. In pretty much every, like, whether it's urology to speech therapy, the private practice model for the people that get to participate, it seems to make things a lot better. There's definitely, something to be said for like, if everybody was in private practice, could we be able to see as many people, or like, could everybody deal with the stress of kind of, being out on their own and being responsible for like getting clients and stuff like that? But at least in terms of how the numbers work out, you have a clinician, they see this many people, it seems to work better overall. So I'd love to hear a little bit about maybe some of your success stories. Are there any like particular memorable cases where the tailored individualized approach that you talked about made a really big difference for a child or for their family?
Oh man, I have so many. These are what keep me going. One child who was 18 months when I started working with him, and it was actually interesting. I started off in home with him through early intervention, and then we transitioned to a teletherapy model. Worked with him up until he was 3, and he was the sweetest boy, sweetest family. He did not want to interact with me. He every single time I would come over, I would try to present 2 options. I would try to give him some cool toys. You just walk the other way. So that first step of, just increasing the social interaction, the joint attention was, interesting situation, because there was a week stretch, a month stretch, where it was a lot of, okay, I'm going to come over and follow his lead, and then he would leave me. And then I learned loves and adores his brother, and his brother was 3 years older. And so what we did is we ended up modifying the speech sessions to be a little bit later in the day once his older brother got home, and we incorporated his older brother into the sessions. So I would, instead of, well, mother was there too, so she was able to hear the strategies and whatnot. But a lot of what I was doing was, trying to incorporate his older brother, because this little kiddo just wanted to do everything his older brother was doing. And that was awesome, because then I was able to incorporate those language strategies. And all of a sudden, his vocabulary exploded. His ability to follow 2-step directions would just skyrocket because of the person presenting the information, the language models, the directions. And then once he realized how, all of the praise and the encouragement he got from working with his brother, he was like, "Ooh, wait, I'm going to respond to mom now. I'm going to respond to Miss Liz." And it just was this incredible, just an incredible sight to see, incorporating a brother, which is a little, unconventional, but being able to change the time of the sessions, I think, is important, which is, again, why I love the flexibility of private practice, being able to do that. I think that was really, really huge. There is another great kiddo. I won't go on with all of these stories, but there is just another kiddo who did such a great job with requesting and commenting, but he was using single words. And we were trying to get him to that next step of using 2-3 word phrases. He really loved letters. He loved words. He loved math. He loved numbers. He could do multiplication at the age of 3. It was incredible. And he was reading before he was using those 2-3 word phrases. So instead, what we incorporated was we would use this whiteboard, and we would create, I would draw pictures, not very well, but I would draw the pictures, and then I would pair it with the words. And he was reading, looking at the pictures, full-blown sentences. And so we used that method, which is, I think, incredible for a 3-year-old to be reading like that, to then work on that spontaneous requesting. And so that just goes back to, seeing what a child is interested in, what their strengths are, and then going off of that to bridge, in this case, it was that spontaneous requesting and commenting using 2-3 words. He wasn't really, he didn't really like doing that. But reading and then, bridging that gap to then using spontaneous and sentences was really incredible to see. So those are just a few of my little stories.
Well, back to story 1. So you got the older brother involved. Can you give me like a specific example? Was it speech exercises about the older brother, or was it the older brother like saying good job when something was completed correctly? Like, what did the collaboration between the younger and older brother actually look like?
So, I would do is, again, I was using a play-based approach, and what I was doing, so he really liked bubbles. What I had the older brother do is he would open up the bubbles, which is curious because I have bubbles here, but I would have him open it up. I would model open. I would have his older brother also model open. And then his little brother would then say open. And he copied his brother. He wasn't copying me, but he was copying his brother because he just wanted to play with his older brother. And then his brother would open up the bubbles. He would blow a couple bubbles. We would model pop, pop bubbles, wasn't imitating me, but I would encourage his older brother to model pop, pop bubbles. And then slowly but surely, the younger brother would then imitate and say pop bubbles. Before you knew it, he was doing it on his own. And so I incorporated like real life, fun, play based activities with both the older brother and the younger brother to, just show him, okay, these are the ways that you can play with him that would support different language opportunities to request, comment, fun things like that.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, when you put it like that, it's so obvious to me how certain SLPs or certain situations can lead to it like actually working for a kid, whereas like a one size fits all approach, you could definitely see how it may not be as successful. Like what you just described is so unique. And it kind of makes me think like if you are outside of the private practice model and you have to see 50 or so people a week and you're working 40 hours a week, it's really freaking hard to have that level of like a customized, like that individualized of a treatment plan. I mean, you wouldn't even be able to do like the rescheduling into the afternoon part, let alone everything else that you're able to figure out.
Yeah.
So, like, that's kind of what I mean by like being able to have maybe a little bit less folks seen, but seeing them in that like perfect way that actually works for them could be a lot more effective than the one size fits all against all these different people. And then like the other thing that I think is just like way not understood, and it wasn't understood by me until I started really working in this field, is if you do the one size fits all approach, it seems like it might work because you think of like different specialties in healthcare, but you guys just don't really have the best title. Like you do so many different things where if you just say like, oh, a given SLP will solve this, it could be anything from teaching people like me to be able to podcast better to what you talked about today with like learning how to be able to go through a story the right way, or a football player who just had a concussion and is trying to communicate again, or someone who slurs their words, or someone who said like there's all these different things, and it's really hard to say that somebody's just going to be an expert in literally all of them and to be able to deliver like the right plan for all these different people. So this is kind of what I mean by like getting super specific with it and finding the right SLP for you is very, very underrated. And even if it's like not through Verse, if you're having issues with your speech therapy journey, I would encourage you to kind of like look for different speech therapists, because it could just be an issue of like you're not with the right person for you rather than like speech therapy is ineffective. You know what I mean?
I would definitely agree. And I think also, like depending on what population you're used to working with. Like I remember working in a skilled nursing facility, and working with the geriatric population was amazing. Those goals are vastly different from goals that you would work on with a young 3-year-old, for example. At that point, it's always about quality of life, but even more so at the geriatric population, because there are some goals that, they may not to baseline, for example. And so I think that was also a really, really important experience for me, that you have to tailor experiences and the population you're working with to really meet them where they are and what goals they want to accomplish for, that functional quality of life. Everything, make everything salient, I think is really important too. unfortunately, if you don't have those experiences, it's harder to just work with everyone under the sun.
Yeah, totally. And then, one thing I'd want to talk about briefly is the SLP side of this and maybe the benefits for SLPs who have decided to, like, if they're considering going after their career the way that you have, like, you've been able to kind of shape a life for yourself that might be a little bit atypical for SLPs, where you have a little bit more control and freedom. One of the cool things is, like, even since we've met, you've been able to live in like really cool spots where there's like all of these outdoor hobbies that you can do. So I believe when we met, you're in San Diego and you've gone to Bend. So outside of work, like you say, super active. These things are like clearly a priority for you between like golf, tennis, beach volleyball, pickleball. How do you find balance between seeing all these different types of clients and your personal hobbies?
I'm still learning to balance all of that. I think what I learned once I went into private practice is that I no longer have that confined 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Instead, I like to think of it as I work 7 days a week on majority of the time. But what's nice is that I can work from 6 to 9, and then I can go to the gym, or I can go take my dogs to the dog park, or I can go, play tennis. And then I come back and I work for another couple of hours. And I learned as a person, I respond so much better to that. I'm way more efficient when I can chunk my time into really meaningful, okay, I'm going to work, get this, this, and this done, and then I get to go for a walk. And so working that 9 to 5 straight through was a little exhausting for me. And I found myself drained by the end of the day, where I just didn't want to do anything by then. But instead, by, waking up early, getting some things done, and then breaking up my day with a couple of active things, whether it's just going to the dog park or gym, has helped me be way more efficient. And, it also just makes me feel like every day is kind of I'm working, but I'm also enjoying what I'm doing, so that it doesn't feel like I'm just waiting for the weekend. Because that was another thing. I feel like I was so stressed throughout the work week that by the weekend, I didn't even want to do anything because I was so exhausted. So, this model, even though it may sound daunting for other individuals, I like it, and I actually feel like it's way more less stressful being a little bit, or well, a lot of it, but day versus just 5 days a week. Um, that is the difference with private practice. If someone, consultation, and, I have a busy Friday with seeing kiddos, I'm going to make time for them on Saturday. And that's just, what I like to do. There's other of doing a private practice, but I like that approach, and I think it keeps me sane.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you have no idea how much that resonates for me, or like either of the co-founders. We both made the same choice as you. And that's also one of the things that I really, really loved about the business model that we chose. It just hopefully can help people take that step if they're the type of person that wants to take that step. For me, like the biggest thing that I realized mentally, again, just for me, is when weekend me and weekday me became the same person. And I was always just kind of like me, there's no escape.
Yeah.
I've been like way, way, way happier. I don't know if that's, scalable or if that's the case for everyone, but I know at least for some people it's a better setup. So I'm glad that we're at least giving people like the choice. And if they really wanted to, they could set up the private practice like similarly to the 9 to 5, but ultimately it's just about giving them that choice and freedom. Uh, Last thing that I'd love to ask you is just about some advice for parents of young children, since that's kind of your MO. Yeah, so pivoting a little bit away from just like the SLP lifestyle, for the parents listening who might have concerns about their child's speech or their language development, what advice would you give them? Are there any specific like signs that they should look for or actions that they could take to support their child?
Question. I would say my very first piece of advice is trust your instincts. If you feel like something is off, I think just early identification is so crucial that it does not hurt to get an evaluation and find out, oh, everything is in the average range. You're good to go. Out that, okay, there are some areas that you can work on, they qualify for speech services, is going to make a world of difference that earlier they're able to get that intervention. I would say some signs that I look for in children would be, if they're having difficulty responding to their name, there's limited babbling, like they're not vocalizing at all by like 12 months. They're not using their voice to kind of experiment and play with different sounds they can make. Um, that is to just look into getting an evaluation or seeking some input from a speech therapist, getting a consultation with us. Actions. I know there's that. Is it behavior or is it, cannot follow directions? And I always like to give the kiddos the benefit of the doubt that if they're not going to throw something out, it may be because they don't understand versus, oh, they don't want to throw it out or they're too busy playing. Frustration. So if you notice a lot of like screaming, yelling, pulling hair, biting, can be a sign of frustration, and we don't want our kids to be frustrated. So I think those are some signs that getting an evaluation might be helpful.
Yeah, totally. And like I agree with you in that it's basically all upside, even outside of just getting the results back and figuring out mechanically how well someone might be communicating. You can end up with just another person who essentially has a full-time job to like look out for your kiddo. So I mean that's just like a really great thing and is basically worth it in itself. It's not just like mechanical communication, it's somebody who helps your kid and their sole goal is to make them able to like share their full self and interact with the world around them as good as possible, which is just like awesome. So I think it's kind of all gravy. Obviously, though, I'm kind of talking but yeah, Liz, I mean, it's such a great conversation. Always a pleasure. Thanks for sharing your journey, your insights, your expertise, especially with the younger kids. Your passion for helping kids and families obviously shines through. It's been super evident to us, especially when we hear from the folks that you work with. And I'm sure that the listeners today will appreciate everything you've shared. So thanks again for joining us on the latest installment of Voices of Verse Therapy.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Adam. And I'm so grateful for everything that Verse Therapy is doing for not only the families and the children that they're working with and adults that they're working with, but the that you're doing to help support private practitioners like myself.
Thank you. All right. Later.